Robinson was elected Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of New Hampshire on June 7, 2003, having served as canon to the ordinary for nearly 18 years. He was consecrated a bishop on All Saints Sunday, November 2nd, 2003, was invested as the 9th Bishop of New Hampshire on March 7th, 2004, and retired as Bishop of New Hampshire on January 5th of this year. Many of you know his story. I happened to be working with integrity in my former job when the vote happened at the General Convention of that Episcopal church gathering in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I have never seen one man handle such triumph, adversity, and triumph again with such grace and dignity as Gene Robinson. He is truly a man of faith. I could go on and on here on his bio. I do want to highlight a few things. He's done a lot of work on AIDS in America and across Africa. He's been involved in youth service organizations for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgendered youth. He was featured in the 2000 feature-length documentary for The Bible Tells Me So. And if you rent that video aside, you will see me in that video along with Bishop Robinson. I think he gets about 30 minutes of the film. I get 30 seconds. But it was a pleasure to be in that film with him. His book, Eye of the Storm, was published in 2008. And his newest book, God Believes in Love, Straight Talk About Gay Marriage, was published in the fall of 2012. Many of you know that Bishop Robinson was honored and invited by President Barack Obama to give the invocation at the opening inaugural ceremonies at the Lincoln Memorial in January of 2009. In his, quote, retirement, Gene is serving as senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, a progressive think tank in Washington, where he writes and speaks on a variety of issues facing the nation. He is also bishop in residence at St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Washington. He enjoys entertaining, cooking, gardening, music, and theater. He is the father of 2 grown daughters and the proud grandfather of 2 granddaughters. He lives with his husband, Mark, who is employed with the state of New Hampshire's Department of Health and Human Services. My friends, it is an honor. It is a privilege for me to introduce to you my hero, my colleague, and my friend, Bishop Gene Robinson.
Thank you very much. Are we getting sound back there? Is that okay? Great. I like it when the back row waves. I am so delighted to be here, not just in Houston, although that's a treat, but to be in this great parish, which has such a wonderful history of working for justice for all people. And please give your boss our thanks, and thank you, sir, for being here and welcome. Someone asked me before tonight, or I guess they said to me that they were really looking forward to seeing what I had to say, and I said to him, so am I. Because I never quite know what's going to come out of my mouth until I say it, so it'll be as new to me as it will be to you. But a couple things. One, it occurs to me that I think I know why the lights are off in the women's room. Yeah, I think all of the feminine energy is with Wendy Davis tonight. And God willing, a lot of the masculine energy as well. We have all been following this little drama going on here in your fine state, and I think you're going to have a really fun time in this election cycle. Also, I just want to say something about sort of my new life in Washington. I am just very proud to be a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. This was a think tank begun by John Podesta, who was Bill Clinton's chief of staff and ran President Obama's transition team. It's one of the good guys in Washington, right? And John is a devout Roman Catholic. Never mind that every social position he holds is in direct contravention of what the Roman Catholic Church officially teaches. But he is a man of faith. He really understands religion and spirituality. And it was quite remarkable. He wanted me to bring a moral voice to the issues that face us as a nation. Another way of saying that is, at least in my own mind, is that we've seen religion done badly by the religious right. And the question is there a way to bring religion into the public debates that we have in a way that is appropriate and that is respectful of other religious opinions as well as non-religious opinions? I think there's a way to do that, and when I get it all figured out, I'll let you know. But that's what I'm trying to do. Let me say that I think the key to taking your faith into public discussions is pretty simple, and you're pretty safe if you begin your statements with "I," or "for me, this is true," or "in my experience, that is true." There's nothing wrong with making a witness and then letting people do with it whatever they want. Where we get into trouble is when I try to tell you what you have to think and how you have to think. And so I think one of the keys, at least, to an appropriate way of bringing our religious perspectives into these wider discussions is to just simply speak for ourselves. By the way, I happen to think that's, for those of you who are religious, that's how evangelism should be. You shouldn't feel like somebody who's grabbed you by the throat and has aggressively, violently attacked you. But it seems to me that we spread whatever word we want to spread by being a shining example and speaking for ourselves. And then if that moves someone to change their mind, fine. But we've got to stop in this country telling everyone else what they have to think. And we would be a lot better off and so on. I had an experience of the non-separation of church and state, I guess, when I did the prayer for President Obama's inauguration. You may or may not know that there was a lot of controversy about that because he had invited Rick Warren to pray, and then I was actually already in the pipeline, so it wasn't just a knee jerk to that appointment. But and I did see Rick on the day of the inauguration itself. President Obama invited me to sit on the presidential platform. I was, 20 or 30 feet from him when he took the oath of office, which is just a great honor. Actually, and sitting in the row in front of me, down towards the end, was Colin Powell, who had the misfortune to be seated right behind Aretha Franklin. And if you recall, Aretha Franklin had a hat on about this big, and Colin Powell spent the entire inaugural ceremony going like this, and like that. And at one point, he just took out his iPhone and watched it on his phone. But on the Sunday before, for the opening inaugural ceremony, I was asked to pray. And you can imagine what an honor that was, and how totally terrifying and intimidating it was. But I had this really interesting experience. I struggled with to whom should I address the prayer, which may not seem like a big thing, but it's a big deal, right? And a sampling of all kinds of Americans were there. And I'm rather fond of the notion of being inclusive, as you might know or imagine. So I began my prayer and addressed it to, O God of our many understandings. I got more hate mail from Christians, that I had a chance to win Americans to Jesus, and I had blown it. I had my chance, and I blew it. But I had Jews and Muslims in particular come up to me afterwards with tears streaming down their faces to say it was the first time they had ever felt included in a public prayer like that. Now, we can also argue about whether we should have been praying at all. That's another discussion. But if we're going to pray, and can I just tell you, if Barack Obama asked you to pray, you'd pray. Just to be clear. But it seems to me that whatever our belief system is, each of us, if we believe in something and put the label God on it, we each have a little teeny tiny piece of God. And we get in trouble when we elevate our little piece of God that we know about and insist that it's got to be everyone else's experience of God or the way they articulate God and so on. And we would all do best to be just a little more humble about that little piece of God that we have come to know through whatever tradition we are a part of. And so I think we have a God of many understandings. And yet my Christian brothers and sisters did not quite agree with me on that. I'm used to that. People not agreeing with me. And I want to talk about that a little bit. In the time that I've been given to talk to United, I want to focus on two things. One is an ongoing debate that we are having in the culture, that for which the separation of church and state is at the heart of what we're arguing about, and that's marriage equality. And then I want to spend the second part of this time with you talking about what I think the next battleground is. Well, it's not like it's in the future, but it's just beginning, and we're going to hear a lot about it. And that's the use of the notion of religious liberty, or freedom of religion, as a way of undoing the anti-discrimination laws that are being put in place around the country. And I think it is a wholly inappropriate use of the freedom of religion that we are so blessed to have in this country to do so. Because I think it's going to take all of us fighting it to actually combat what I see as a very frightening trend. The marriage equality debate that's going on, let's sort of review. We've got 12 states in the District of Columbia that has marriage equality. You know, we have seen such progress in such a short period of time. It is staggering. None of us could have imagined. I mean, I remember back in the early 90s, the gay community was having an internal fight about whether we should pursue marriage or not. And frankly, the consensus was that no, we should not push for the right to marry, because the backlash from that push would set us back decades. And I really credit Evan Wolfson, who was the national director of the Freedom to Marry Coalition, with nobody could stop him from singing the song that said, unless we have marriage, we won't be equal. And for a while, he was about the only person singing that song. And then we all began to understand that he was absolutely right. And I want to pay honor and tribute to him, because without his voice, I'm not sure we would have gotten here, and certainly not gotten here as quickly as we have. But the issue of marriage equality, while it seems inevitable, like the momentum forward seems like it's unstoppable, let's just remember that we have, in a sense, picked the low-hanging fruit. Most of the states that do not yet have marriage equality have constitutional amendments defining marriage as between a man and a woman, and those have to be undone before marriage equality can be moved forward. And those are going to be very, very tough battles. I honestly think, most of those were passed roughly between 2000 and 2003, let's say. And I don't think they would pass today in an awful lot of those states, because our mindset has so changed on this issue. But they're in place, and they will not be undone easily. And right at the center of not just the legal issue, but the cultural issue, is the issue of separation of church and state as it relates to marriage. If you want this whole lecture, you can buy my book, right? But let me give you the Cliff's Notes version of that, which is to say that, generally speaking, marriage is this incredibly patriarchal system whereby the ownership of women was passed from one man to another, namely from the father to a husband. We see vestiges of this. You get the father walking the bride up the aisle. Never mind that the mother, who probably did 90% of the parenting, is sitting in the front pew as if she was just sort of an invited guest, right? And then if you do it the old-fashioned way, the father takes the hand of the piece of property and places it in the hand of the new owner. Yeah? I mean, we've got all those vestiges, right? And by the way, I think we could do with a really good critique of the institution of marriage, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about whether or not every citizen of this great nation should have the ability, the right, the civil right, to marry the person that they love. Marriage was actually quite a secular matter for a very, very long time. And in fact, if you weren't wealthy, there was no reason to be married. It was only if you had significant property and wealth to pass along, and it was important to know actually who the real heirs were. That was why marriage was important. And commoners, the peasants, got married just by living together, without benefit of clergy or church. We know it as a common law marriage, right? And it wasn't until the Middle Ages that the church got involved in marriage at all, and not until the 13th century that a priest of the church was even required to be present for the institution of marriage. Now, we've gotten really confused about all this in this country for one simple reason, is that the state has deputized clergy to be agents of the state in the enactment of marriage, right? What makes you married in America is 3 names on a marriage license: the 2 people getting married and the authorized agent of the state, which generally speaking in this culture, is a clergy person of some denomination or other. That's what makes you married. The state doesn't care what the vows say or whether you even have vows. The state doesn't care how good the music was, whether or not there was a sermon, whether or not there was communion, whether or not, the wedding party fought with each other or whether the in-laws didn't like each other. I mean, the state cares about 3 signatures on a piece of paper that gets returned to the town clerk or whatever magistrate oversees that in that jurisdiction. That's what makes you married. But no one who attends a wedding actually gets to see that. I mean, generally speaking, I have the bride and groom sign the wedding license at the rehearsal, and then I sign it after the wedding and send it in. And they're married. If I don't send it in, they're not married. I usually use that to get their attention a little bit. And in this country, I think in virtually every state, anyone can officiate. I mean, it's one of the ways we get money out of staters, right? They pay their 25 bucks or 125, whatever it is, and you can get a license in the state of New Hampshire to perform the marriage on behalf of the state. But because so often it is a clergy person that acts as an agent of the state, we lose all sense of the fact that we have something civil going on, although it might not be terribly civil. We have something civil going on as well as something religious. And so you don't know where the civil part begins and ends and where the religious part begins and ends. Interestingly, the church has always understood that marriage is the one sacrament not officiated or accomplished by the clergy, but by the 2 people who are marrying each other. They are actually, even if you think of it as a sacrament, this is a sacrament that is actually performed by the 2 principals. And what the church then does, and what the community of the church gathered around does after that, is to bless that marriage. Now, whatever you think about the French, they actually get this right. Everybody gets married at the mayor's office. And then if you're a person of faith, you go to that place of worship and do there whatever the church or the synagogue or the mosque does. But here in this country, it's terribly mixed up. So when we're doing all the marriage equality legislation in New Hampshire, New Hampshire was the first one that wrote some religious language into the marriage equality bill itself, which was to restate, first of all, what was already true, which is that no clergy person would ever have to preside over, bless, or in any way participate in a same-sex marriage if marriage equality came to New Hampshire. Now, that has always been true. As a clergy person, I don't have to marry anybody I don't want to. I can give any reason, or I can give no reason. I can decline to marry anyone who comes to me seeking to be married. And that is still true after marriage equality comes. But it's just very difficult to get people to tease apart this civil and religious actions that are taking place. And you've heard the rhetoric, you've read it if you've not heard it, about how this is an attack on the institution of marriage and so on, which, frankly, I have a friend who is the rector of a big church in New York City. I was calling him because wanted to get his permission to do a same-gender wedding at his church. We were talking about this, and he said how it was so interesting to him that when heterosexual couples come to be married, and he explains that there will be 6 to 8 premarital counseling sessions and so on, that they like roll their eyes and they're, oh my God, and we've got the caterer and the florist and the, the invitations and all that, and we don't know how we can fit all that in. They just seem kind of disinterested. But the gay or lesbian couples that come to be married, they want all 8 sessions, and they want to go over every word of the service because they want to be able to say these words with integrity, and they want to know what they mean. They want to make sure that each of them agrees on what they mean. And in this discussion, he and I decided that, in fact, gay marriage might save marriage rather than undermine it. So while we're doing all this legislation, I decided rather than just talk about this stuff, maybe we ought to try doing something. So I encouraged my clergy to get out of the marriage business and to stay in the blessing business. So I suggested that they would, in their church, St. Swithin's by the gas pump, that at St. Swithin's that they would identify someone who either already was a justice of the peace or would be certified as such. And so when a couple, gay or straight, came to them to be married, they would say, well, let me tell you how we do weddings here at St. Swithin's. Now, you know Joe Blow, he's our senior warden. Well, he's also an agent of the state, he's a justice of the peace, and he will actually marry you at the back of the church. He'll do what the state does at the back of the church, sort of symbolically where the sacred and the secular meet. And then after you're married by the state, because the state marries you, then you'll process up the aisle and we'll sing hymns and we'll read scripture and you will repeat your vows and invite God into your marriage and invite the community into your marriage, and then I will bless the marriage, because that's what the church does. It really works. I mean, it's really nice. And the kind of radical part of it is that every person who attends such a ceremony gets a lesson in what is sacred and what is secular, where the civil part begins and ends, and where the religious part begins and ends. And what this does is it allows people who have been opposed to 2 men or 2 women getting married, it gives them a way forward to say, wait a minute, this doesn't change what the church thinks about marriage. It just separates the two. And then if you go to a church that doesn't believe that this is a good and holy thing, then your church never has to bless such a union. But it can't be used as a reason for voting against marriage equality legislation. And we actually won over a whole bunch of people who were previously opposed to gay marriage when they were assured that this separation was not only good but right. They felt free to vote for it. So this is one of those things as we move forward. And by the way, even if you're in a state where marriage equality is not apt to be voted in, let's see, that might be. If you happen to be in one of those states, then you're still going to need to deal with this issue when, and it will happen, when the Supreme Court makes marriage equality the law of the land. So even though you might not be dealing with it at the legislative state level, when marriage equality comes, and it will come to a theater near you, we're still going to need to do this work because there will still be hearts and minds to be changed around this issue. And I think this is just one of those places where where this separation of church and state can really have a big payoff. Can I also just mention, as a sidebar, is that one of the great blessings of gay marriage is gay divorce. I know that sounds really odd coming from me, but have you ever realized that a gay couple, prior to marriage equality, had no recourse in the courts? I say in my book that the divorce laws and the divorce procedures, at their best, get you to love your neighbor as yourself at a time when you least want to, right? And it tries to ensure the fair treatment of both parties and any children that may be involved in that relationship. And gay and lesbian couples have not had access to that kind of protection before. And there's some real horror stories about that. I mean, gay and lesbian couples can be nasty to each other just like straight couples. You know? You saw the New Yorker cartoon, the guy sitting in front of his TV reading the newspaper, and the wife's there, and he says, "Gay marriage? Haven't they suffered enough?" So, you like that, huh? Really? Haven't they suffered enough? So, marriage equality is one of these issues where actually the separation of church and state not only is the right thing, but it could be a very helpful thing to us. And I think it helps draw away some of the heat around this debate. Not all of it. There are lots of other concerns about gay marriage. I try to deal with each one of those in my book. But I think this one in particular lends itself to our topic tonight about the importance of this separation of church and state. And indeed, religious bodies, even the most conservative ones, have nothing to fear because there is no threat to their belief system, to the practice of their religion, and no one's going to make them do something that is against their own wishes, as it should be. However, I would also say that when religious people use religious arguments against us in those legislative processes, it is an instance of the state needing to be protected from the church, the synagogue, and the mosque, right? I mean, it seems to me this separation of church and state thing goes in both directions. And frankly, at the moment, I think the state needs more protection from religious institutions than religious institutions need protection from the state in this particular time. Which somewhat brings us to the second topic, because just as various religious individuals and religious institutions are trying to foist themselves on our understanding of the constitutional rights of citizens, we're also seeing the beginnings of an expansion of this attack on our civil liberties based on religious principles. So, when I talk about religious liberty, I'm referring to the First Amendment protected right to practice our religion, our religious life, our liturgies and worship and doctrine and teachings and self-governance without interference from the state. That is a ditch I would die, right? It's one of the things that sets us apart from most of the world. Even going to a nice, overly civilized place like England, you know, you're left with, so like, what does a state church do? And they're now, you know, England is about to get marriage equality, and they've got a state church that is opposed to marriage equality, which is like an oxymoron, isn't it? I mean, if you're the state church, how can you How can you refuse to perform those things that have been sanctioned by the state? I'm going there in about 10 days. I'm going to try to find out. I'll get back to you on that. And what's happening, I think, in this debate, in which, by the way, the words religious liberty have almost been taken away from us. I mean, it has almost become the property of the religious right, and we have to somehow understand that those are our words too. We believe in religious liberty too. And what we have to do is to delineate what each of us means about that and what the differences are. I'm going to try to do that for you. What is happening is that religious institutions and individuals are trying to say, I think, that beyond the First Amendment protection for religious practice and worship and doctrine and self-governance, beyond that, they ought to be protected when they're involved in any action in the public realm that is undertaken by a religiously inspired motivation. Okay? So if they care for the sick and they operate a hospital, if they care for children and run an adoption agency, because they do these things for religious reasons, out of a religious motivation, they feel that that action ought to be protected the same way their liturgies, their worship, their self-governance is protected. And I would argue that that gets us into a lot of trouble. So we agree that the state shouldn't be messing with our worship and our doctrine and our self-governance. I would even say that St. Stephen's here, if it were opposed to same-sex marriage, should not be coerced into having a same-sex marriage take place in their worship space. That seems to me part of that protection that they are owed. So the sacred space is protected. What about the parish hall? That's not sacred space. What if a gay couple wanted to have their wedding reception there? It gets a little fuzzy, doesn't it? Right? And we'll get back to that in just a minute. It seems to me that when you operate in the public marketplace, you have to play by the marketplace's rules. We've now seen lawsuits that are arguing that florists and caterers and photographers should be able to refuse service to a gay couple who want to employ those services for a gay wedding. I don't know how you feel about that. I'm not sure I would want an anti-gay photographer. But, you know, I mean, this has gotten really complicated. The florist that was sued, I think this was in Washington State, was not sued by the couple. They bought flowers from this woman forever. And she was happy to sell them flowers. She just wasn't willing to provide flowers for their wedding. And they didn't sue her, but the Civil Rights Commission did in the state of Washington. Now, so this gets crazy. I think in Oregon we had a baker who didn't want to bake a cake. And this may all seem silly, but I think it's going to be really important that we nip this in the bud before it spreads out to cover just about anything. We got a great decision out of the New Mexico Supreme Court recently. And this was the one around the photographer who did not want to photograph a gay wedding. Let me just read you part of the decision, because I think this points us in the right direction and could really save us in this area. This is a quote from the decision. We conclude that a commercial photography business that offers its services to the public, thereby increasing its visibility to potential clients, is subject to the anti-discrimination provisions of the New Mexico Human Rights Act, and must serve same-sex couples on the same basis that it serves opposite-sex couples. Therefore, when Elan Photography refused to photograph a same-sex commitment ceremony, it violated the New Mexico Human Rights Act in the same way as if it had refused to photograph a wedding between people of different races. The purpose of the New Mexico Human Rights Act is to ensure that businesses offering services to the general public do not discriminate against protected classes of people, and the United States Supreme Court has made it clear that the First Amendment permits such regulation by states. Businesses that choose to be public accommodations must comply with the New Mexico Human Rights Act, although such businesses retain their First Amendment rights to express their religious or political beliefs. They may, for example, post a disclaimer on their website or in their studio advertising that they oppose same-sex marriage, but that they comply with applicable anti-discrimination laws. Get the difference there? Their freedom of expression is protected. Their ability and their right to discriminate is not. Now, let's be clear around the gay issue. There are only 21 states, 21 out of 50, that have any protections for gay or lesbian, bisexual, or transgender people, and even fewer for transgender people. 29 states have no such protections. So, any baker, any photographer, any florist, anyone who wants to refuse services can do so, and there is no recourse to the courts. In fact, you may be part of the 90% of Americans who believe that you can't be fired from your job because you're gay. 90% of Americans believe that there is that kind of job protection, and it's not true. And there is no federal protection, none, for someone who gets fired because their boss saw them in the gay pride parade on TV. Right? So first of all, these cases are only coming up in places that have LGBT anti-discrimination policies as part of the law. And that's only in 21 out of the 50 states. If we allow this, if we allow that kind of protection for people's religious sensibilities, it's not very far from refusing to serve lunch at a lunch counter to an African American. Because what, your religion suggests that they are inferior and therefore you don't need to serve them at your lunch counter? I can see some of you are old enough like I am to remember those days, right? And it's a very thin line between what we're seeing argued right now in our courts and what we thought we had gotten away from with our Jim Crow laws. I'm waiting for someone to refuse to serve people with a tattoo. You know, they're forbidden in the Old Testament. You know something I could get behind? I mean, I might be a little more sympathetic to these people if they didn't serve people they judged to be greedy. You know, like really, really, really wealthy people who were probably just a little bit greedy in order to get there. Because the Bible is full of stuff about greed and not so much about homosexuality. One gets the impression that this is just a way of getting to continue the kind of discrimination that gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people have experienced for a very, very long time. Now let's get back to the parish hall, about whether or not we should rent that out. I think one of the helpful ways of thinking about this particular separation of church and state, we might get a hint from the tax law. So St. Paul's Church in Concord, New Hampshire sits right by the State House. And parking is a nightmare in Concord, especially when the legislature is in session. And their parking spaces aren't used much during the week, so they rent them out. Now, they have to pay tax on the revenues that come in from those parking spaces. Why? Because that's not the mission for which they are a nonprofit, right? They're not in the parking business. They're in the religion business. So when they do something that's not part of that religious tax-exempt purpose, then they have to conform to the laws of any parking lot, right? And it seems to me that this would be a very helpful kind of distinction, that we enjoy a First Amendment protection for that which is religious, but not for that which we may do, but do so in the public sphere. Let's get a little more thorny here. The adoption issue is really pretty significant. You know, the Catholic Charities of Boston stopped doing adoptions because the law forbade them to discriminate against gay couples who wanted to adopt. Now, they claim religious persecution for that, but they were taking public money. If they had been a private agency, they could have discriminated all they wanted. But as an organization that received public money, they had to play by the public rules. I think that is absolutely as it should be. And the fact that they were doing the adoption work because of a religious motivation does not qualify that activity for an exemption due to freedom of religion. The same would be true. We've got lots of hospitals owned by Catholic and other religious groups that don't want to give contraceptive care in their insurance. So we see all of these encroachments, and I love it when these people play the victim, like they're living in some kind of Nazi Germany thing that's trying to destroy their religion. I do take them seriously. I know that they see it as a threat and as an affront, but I think people like this great organization and other like-minded people need to be very, very resolute in resisting this kind of mission creep. I mean, this is protection creep or something, taking us into a place that I think we don't want to go. And you're gonna be hearing about it all over the place, and you're going to be hearing people talking like they're victims of some anti-religious fervor. And indeed, I think it's not the case. What we are trying to do is preserve that separation between church and state in a way that is true to the Constitution, is true to the Bill of Rights, is true to what I think makes this nation great in terms of its protection of religion without over-involvement in it. And that's something I think we all need to be a part of. Lastly, and I've already talked way too long, I'm sorry. Lastly, let me just mention a postscript here. It's not a fully thought out idea because it just occurred to me like day before yesterday. I was speaking at Alfred University, and my host and my sort of guide there was a woman on the faculty, and she is Buddhist. And we were talking about something, and she mentioned the phrase religious privilege, like we would talk about white privilege as it relates to racism. And we would talk about male privilege as it relates to sexism, right? Or heterosexual privilege as it relates to heterosexism. And I've been thinking about it and waking up in the middle of the night thinking about it ever since. I mean, it seems to me that for those of us who are religious, it is going to be difficult to understand and grasp the privilege we enjoy in this country because of our largely religious past. It's like, I can remember in anti-racism training someone saying that for a white person to grasp the concept of white privilege is like trying to get a fish to understand the concept of water. It's just the thing that buoys you up. It's the medium in which you swim, and you can't get away from it enough to actually see what it's doing. And it seems to me that a conversation that those of us who are part of religious institutions that might serve us well is to think of the ways in which we have been religiously privileged and ask the question, is that something that we actually want to continue? I would say that we have privileged the religious over the non-religious, and I would say in this nation we have privileged Christians over all the other religions, right? And so it seems to me that if we want to sort of continue our own growth in this, we might do well to think about that concept of privilege and wanting to overcome it. Let me end just by saying that I think this is going to take a fair amount of courage. You live in a part of the United States that Herb O'Driscoll, a theologian in Canada, has described as the only part of the United States that's not post-Christian. Right? And I think that's true. Where I grew up in Kentucky, people still ask you what church you go to, not whether you go to church, right? And I've seen enough Baptist churches down here and others that I suspect that's true here as well. It's going to take some courage on our part to resist these forces that would insist on religion's way over the Constitution. And I am dyed-in-the-wool, patriotic, my country 'tis of thee, love this title. And part of what makes us great is our ability to keep these things separate. And you get called all kinds of names and maybe worse when you stand up for what is essentially one of the core values of our nation. And yet if we don't do it, we're going to find ourselves living in a very different nation. And gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender people will not be the only ones who will pay a price for that. We will all pay a price for that. So I want to be a cheerleader for you and encourage you to stand up. And by stand up, I mean, when you're at a cocktail party and somebody says something, don't let them get away with it, right? Don't cooperate with that kind of oppression because before you know it, it'll be everywhere. I think faithfulness to our Constitution and faithfulness to the appropriate separation of church and state for the protection of both, is key to our freedom. Thank you. Oh boy, I don't know. When I see something like that, the question that always comes to me is, what are they afraid of, right? I mean, most of the awful things going on in the world, the first question I ask is, so what is the fear behind this thing? Because usually the thing itself is unsolvable, but you might be able to speak to the fears. I don't think that a religion worth its weight needs help from the establishment, right? I think that we either make it on our own or we don't make it. We either make sense to our people or we don't, and they leave. And so to see that kind of thing, I just don't think we need it. And like I said, I do think we need to really ask the question whether or not we should be having a prayer at the beginning of the inaugural ceremony. Although if I was asked again, I just want to tell you I would say yes. But I think it's a fear that if we had to actually make it on our own merits, we might not make it. That's just my guess. You probably know these people better than I, but I just don't think a religion needs that kind of publicly supported support.
A similar question, and I've had to face this as a minister myself, and I see there is one into your left. Shouldn't we remove the U.S. flags from our sanctuary?
Yes. So, absolutely. But I will tell you, as a priest and as a bishop, you could do almost anything in this worship space, and it would not get the blowback that removing the American flag would get. I'm just saying, if you think that's an easy thing to do, like let the rector just remove it, oh my God, you have no idea. And so I think a lot of that, is there are a lot of people who risk a lot, including their lives for this country, and who obviously, I don't even consider that just a piece of cloth. It is highly symbolic. But what is also symbolic is them both being here in this space. Let me just say, so here's what I really think. I don't think that let me just speak for the church now. Well, I think I can speak for Jews too, because I want to talk about the prophetic tradition, which is not only evident in the life of Jesus, but certainly in the life of the prophets, right, of the Hebrew Scriptures. I don't think the church is going to recover its prophetic ministry. And by prophetic, I mean to criticize the powers that be. When the culture, when the government, is cutting food stamps by $40 billion over the next 10 years. I mean, what would Isaiah and Amos and Jeremiah have said about that? I can tell you what they would have said about that. They would have stood up and they would have said to the king, "Are you freaking kidding me?" On God's behalf. It's hard to do that if your tax exemption is at stake. And I am not sure that we are going to recover our prophetic mission and our prophetic voice until we lose our tax exempt status. Because we are not, generally speaking, going to bite the hand that feeds us. Now, as a bishop with 57 churches, I can tell you 10 at least that would close tomorrow if they lost their tax-exempt status. So I'm not saying that this would be easy or without pain or not complicated, but I think ever since Constantine invited the church to crawl into bed with him in the 4th century, we have paid a terrible price. And the fact that religious people don't get into more trouble than they do frightens me. Jesus was always in trouble. The prophets were always in trouble. And it seems to me that it may not be the gospel we're preaching if we too aren't getting in trouble. And I wonder if one of the things that keep us muzzled and keep us paralyzed is that tiny little advantage we have that we've been given by the government, maybe as hush money.
This person says, in our hyper-religious political climate, how can we counteract the insistence that every candidate parade his or her religion to the electorate? And can you ever envision a time when an atheist could be elected to public office, maybe even president?
Well, I sure hope so. I think a model for me on this was, do you remember when all the hooey was going on about Barack Obama being a Muslim? Yes. And everybody was arguing, was he or wasn't he, was he or wasn't he? And Colin Powell, on one of those Sunday morning talk shows, he should have been in his Episcopal church, but he was on Meet the Press or somewhere, and he said, I'm not going to try to answer that question. I want to ask another question. What difference would it make? Right? So I think that's really at the point. What difference would it make? And I think, frankly, we're a good long way from getting there. But yeah, I can foresee it. I mean, but it's why this religious liberty thing and things like it are important. I mean, those are all building blocks that either move us in this direction or that way. And it is sure time that we got over the notion that humanist is a bad thing. Yeah.
This person wants to know, and we face this all the time, and relates to the marriage equality issue. What is your position on whether government officials, for example, justices of the peace, should be required to perform gay marriage against their own religious beliefs? Many candidates said, like Michelle Bachmann, that would go against their religious freedom.
Yeah, well, they don't have to be justices of the peace. I mean, so, I don't know, it would be like saying, I want to be a bus driver, but don't make me drive buses? I don't know. It just makes no sense. I mean, and we've seen a number of these cases both in this country and abroad. But it seems to me that if you're going to operate as an instrument of the state, if you're not willing to do those things which the state requires, then you best resign. It's not a right to be a justice of the peace. It's something you choose to do. And as this New Mexico case said, you know, when you actually choose to go public, the emphasis there is on choose. You've actually chosen to do that thing. And so you cannot selectively claim an exemption on the job description. So no, yeah, and it makes me so crazy. It's the victimization language that really makes me crazy. I mean, it's fine to think that way, but don't claim that you're being persecuted, right?
I think a little bit more around maybe in the issue of the flag. I appreciate and share the effort to reframe the dominant cultural language of religion. Can we do the same around patriotism?
Well, you know, patriotism is a kind of religion, isn't it? You know, and it is subject, it seems to me, to the same abuses and to the same extremism that any of our religions are subject to. And we have extremists in all of our religious institutions. And there are extremist atheists too, right? I mean, it's sort of like, you know, I went to college at Sewanee. You know Sewanee, the University of the South? And there, because it's in the middle of nowhere, the only kind of social life were the fraternities, right? And so you were either in one of the 16 fraternities, or if you didn't join a fraternity, you were a member of the Independence House. They had their own house, their own bylaws, their own whatever. So it's like, yeah, you're a member of a fraternity, and it's called the Independence, right? So it does seem to me that patriotism can take on all of those vestiges of religious fervor, certainly. And there are abuses and extreme versions of it. And at the core of both of our religious institutions and devotion to our nation, there is a strong central core that is worthy of honor and worthy of preservation. The real problem is what do we do with the extremes?
So 2 questions similar around marriage. The first saying when, where, and who started the marriage tradition, maybe within the context of the church. If you could give maybe a little bit of history around that. And then this person wants to know, why should marriage be a state or civil matter? Understand that there are benefits to being married, but doesn't that lead to discrimination of single people not getting health insurance, being disadvantaged, higher taxes, etc.?
Yeah. Let me do the second one first. Which is to say, I mean, you may not agree with it, but I think the general understanding is that over time, cultures have determined that marriages contribute to the stability of a society. and that society's interest in marriages and the reason for support of them is that it makes for a more stable culture. Now, you may not agree with that. You may agree that it's changed now that half marriages end in divorce anyway, or whatever. But I think that's how we have always understood the role of marriage in society and why most cultures have supported it in one way or another. When did it start? Well, I don't know when it started, but I am sick to death of people bringing up Adam and Eve as if they had, had a wedding with flower girls and ring bearers and so on and so on. I just don't see any marriage thing in there. And by the way, just while I'm on that subject, this has nothing to do with our topic. I just want to talk about it. I learned this from the first openly gay Orthodox rabbi. There's a tough row to hoe right there. Because our opponents around LGBT issues have stopped, for the most part, at least where I live, talking about Sodom and Gomorrah and all that kind of stuff, They want to talk about Adam and Eve. Everybody's talking about Adam and Eve. He points out that this rabbi does, that Eden was not perfect. We think of it as, God created everything perfect and then humankind screwed it up. He points out that Eden was not perfect because Adam was lonely. Adam was lonely. And God didn't know what would make him happy. So he brings all the animals to him. Like, here's the duck-billed platypus. Does that make you happy? Here's a giraffe. Isn't it a riot? You feel less lonely now? And Adam says, not really. And then God says, oh, that's right. And creates Eve. And Adam says, bingo. That's exactly right. And this rabbi says, and what that means is that as human beings, we have the right to choose what makes us happy. And so if what cures my loneliness is another man, and what cures your loneliness is a person of the opposite sex, good for both of us, right?
We as the national organization just recognized this author with, I think, our award last November for our annual meeting. What do you think of Shallot's book, The Family? The Family, about the C Street house in Washington, D.C.?
Oh, I haven't read that stuff. Any book that exposes hypocrisy is good in my book, right? This is what I mean about our lack of humility, right? Do you know in Alcoholics Anonymous, we define humility as being right-sized. Humility is not about not recognizing or acknowledging the gifts you have, the ways in which God has blessed you with skills and experience and sensitivities and so on. Being humble is about being right-sized. It's about understanding yourself in right proportion to everything around you. And the corrosive thing about hypocrisy is that it is a distortion of that right-sizedness, right? It's that projection of one's own dark side onto someone else, and if I can kill it out there, maybe it'll die in me too. And it's just one of the great tragedies of of human existence, I think that's our tendency to do that. But I haven't read the book.
Okay. We're going to close with this last question. I think it's a good question to close on. It says, in a world of hardcore religious fundamentalism.
I think we would say hardcore pornography. Sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
How do you go on after that? And an increase in those being irreligious or not religious at all. What do religious progressives do? What is the voice that can be other than these two options for those that are progressive and religious?
Yeah. I think it was G.K. Chesterton that said, it's not that he had a problem with Christianity, it's just that he had never seen it tried. I think if religious institutions did a better job of living up to the ideals that they claim shape them and form them, there'd be a lot more people interested. I mean, I'm in the religion business, right? So I'm going to make a case for that. And to my way of thinking, it's what I said before about we just are not in enough trouble. And it seemed to me that the early church, one of the best things about the early church was that it was a constant irritant to the powers that be. And I do think that Constantine made a brilliant move when he co-opted Christianity and defanged it, right? And I think, my experience is, in this day and time, is that young people, in particular, who are suspicious of institutions to begin with, in general, and extremely suspicious of churches, religious institutions, and are not at all appreciative about what churches say about their gay and lesbian friends. My experience is those people begin to believe in their tradition when they actually see it acting like their tradition, and stop being so fearful, and stop worrying about its survival, and start acting like the prophetic people that I think we're called to be. So I think it's a failure of nerve, or more theologically speaking, I think it's a failure in believing that God loves us beyond our wildest imagining, and that when you've got that, you can do anything because you believe that nothing can come between you and the love that God has for you. And when you have that, and nobody and no thing can take it away from you, it is astounding what you can do. It is astounding what you can do. And my experience is that when people see that, they want a piece of it. You know, I'll have what she's having.